Hi, welcome to Numeric's video blog. I'm your host, Jim Jockel. Earlier this year, Risk Magazine published a survey of risk managers looking at all of the challenges in terms of compliance with new regulatory regimes. But most interesting was 38% of the respondents of the survey cited out-of-date systems as the biggest barrier to regulatory compliance. Interesting, last week, Greenwich Associates published a new report, The Future of Financial Markets Operating Systems. Here comes HTML5. Joining me today is Dan Connell, Managing Director of Greenwich Associates Market Structure and Technology Practice. Welcome, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Good to be here.
Why don't we just jump right in? This is a fascinating report. It's up on the Greenwich Associates website. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about how firms are starting to think about their operating systems going forward?
Yeah, sure thing. So we've been seeing this come for quite some time, and I think there's been a number of catalysts that have gotten firms to start thinking more openly, no pun intended, about their operating systems and the support. And I think not the least of which is the desire to have a consistent set of applications across platforms, and how difficult that actually is when you're tied to a specific operating system, whether that operating system be Microsoft, whether it be something else, or whether it be BlackBerry with some legacy mobile apps, right? And so the question is, how do you get application development? How do you satisfy the users across the multitude of platforms, but do it in an efficient way where you're not programming in multiple environments?
So one of the findings I found really interesting was 70% of the 149 institutions that you surveyed are still on Windows 7. I mean, clearly right now the market's looking forward to the introduction of Windows 10, but yet there's still Linux, there's Mac. How is the use of Windows 7 going to look going forward? Microsoft clearly has been a dominant player in financial services. Is this trend going to continue?
Well, the answer to that is, in a yes or no way, is going to be yes. Microsoft will continue to be the dominant player. It is certainly tied as a backbone in financial markets. I think one of the main things tying Microsoft to the desktop, quite honestly, is all of the applications that are ported over and written in Excel. And the vast majority of desktop analytics are all done in Excel. So Microsoft's not going away, but I think some of the data that we got back that you reference, Windows 7, the poor adoption of Windows 8. In fact, in our research, we found that XP actually has a higher presentation on the desktop than Windows 8 does at this point, and a number of reasons for that. But we'll see what Windows 10 can bring.
So what is going to be the catalyst for upgrade? I think, according to your survey, you're showing 35% are committed to Windows 10 and .NET going forward. There's, some questions open as it relates to that commitment. But, you think of Windows 7 or XP, what is that tipping point for upgrades?
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, just over a third of the folks did respond that they were committed to moving forward and continuing on the Microsoft path. I think that's probably understated, because it was also a large contingent that left it unknown, right? And I suspect that the vast majority of those unknowns will be Microsoft environments, right? So I think Microsoft at 70% today is probably going to continue. But I think there's also a groundswell of support for sort of open system and operating and hardware platform independent environments, and that's where we struck on HTML5 and where we see a tremendous amount of adoption.
So that brings up an interesting question, right? So, you go back a couple of years, is the future Silverlight? Is the future HTML5? It looks like clearly the winner is going to be HTML5. But yet, some of the firms don't even have an HTML5 strategy at this point. Is there a particular catalyst? Is it retail business for cross-platform and mobile? Is it internal in terms of the cross-platform? Where's the genesis of this going to happen within an institution?
Yeah, and you're right. the majority of firms didn't have a strategy, although we found, for example, on the sell side that a high percentage did. Less so on the buy side, and I suppose that makes sense as the sell side tends to lead the charge in the technology adoption. But I think you hit on it. It's the cross-platform use of applications, the ability to take your desktop with you and have it on your iPad or your Surface or your iPhone, and be able to get the same experience that you have on your desktop, which in the past has been difficult. You've had part of the experience. So, for example, in the financial side, and even on the trading side, you've had much more capability in your mobile device to what we call view, right? I want to see what's happening with the market. I want to see where the market is at and where it's going. I want to read updates and get news and those kinds of things. More and more, it has turned to view and do, and so people want to be able to react to that as they would at their desktop, which requires a new set of applications, right? And the way to do that is to have an environment that works across platform.
So looking ahead, we're can only assume a continued uptick in spending going forward, especially given the amount of legacy that still exists in financial institutions today.
I think that's right. The difficult thing there is there's so many other pressures when it comes to budgets, right? Not just overall earnings pressure for the street, but also pressure, right? Whether that's compliance taking a bigger bite out of the available budget. And then you mentioned legacy, right? Legacy continues to take a huge chunk of the technology side and the IT side of budgets. Just trying to keep things running in the older environments, right? Which leaves a smaller slice for new things.
So Dan, final question. I think a lot of us look at operating systems, like Microsoft, or looking at new solutions for HTML5 as something that we have to do. But are there opportunities for competitive advantages for firms that are making these investments in new technologies, whether that's on the trading desk in terms of drill down analysis or speed by cloud? Where's the compelling event for these firms?
Yeah, I think there is a competitive advantage, and you saw that. You briefly mentioned the cloud. If you go back 5-7 years ago, there was a lot of hesitancy to be putting financial applications in the cloud, and you look around the industry now, and it's getting much more commonplace, right? And it's commonplace because the financial advantage and processing power of the cloud has made it one that people can't ignore, right? And folks have gotten over the security issues that were prominent back then. And the same type of thing is going to lend itself to adoption of things like HTML5. When you see the replacement of legacy apps, and gee, do we want to do it in the Windows desktop, and then also do it over in the BlackBerry environment, and then also do it in an iOS environment? Makes no sense not to adopt one that goes across all platforms.
Actually, so that let me ask one more question, and you brought up the word security. I know a lot of with HTML5 and utilizing web services, there always have been questions as it relates to security, but I think there's been a lot of advancements in that area. Perhaps you have some insight and input on the security issues around the use of HTML5.
Yeah, a lot of advancements there, Jim, and it's become, like I say, it's become commonplace as a platform, and folks have figured it out. Just as I said, just as they did with the cloud, the HTML5 environment has become much more secure, and the rapid adoption by the street has led to that increase in security.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of the
Sure.
insights from your new report. And again, the report by Greenwich Associates at GreenwichAssociates.com is The Future of Financial Markets Operating Systems. Here comes HTML5. So if you're interested in seeing the full breadth of that report, I urge you to go to the website. It's an excellent read. Dan, thank you so much, and I hope you'll join us again in the future.